Hey guys, tonight's story takes us into one of the longest and most complex manhunts in American history. A case where the killer wasn't just dangerous, but brilliant. For nearly 2 decades, Ted Kaczynski mailed bombs across the country, leaving investigators chasing a ghost who always seemed one step ahead. No fingerprints, no clear motive, just ideas, isolation, and a mind built to disappear. So before you get comfortable, if you enjoy what I do here, consider liking the video and subscribing. It really helps me keep making these videos. And let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is for you. It's always fascinating to see you guys tuning in every night. Now, dim the lights, put on some headphones for a more immersive experience, and let's ease into tonight's story together. Lincoln, Montana, 1996. A shack buried in the forest, smaller than most people's garden sheds, is home to one of the most elusive killers in American history. This is where Theodore J. Kaczynski, better known as the Unabomber, has been hiding in plain sight. For nearly 2 decades, he's waged a one-man war against modern society, mailing bombs to universities, airlines, scientists, people he sees as cogs in the machine. No clear motive, no clear pattern, just destruction. He's the ghost who outsmarted the FBI for 17 years. The boogeyman with a PhD. This isn't just a criminal, it's the most expensive, longest-running manhunt in the history of American law enforcement. And all roads lead here, a homemade cabin deep in the Montana woods. This is where the manifesto was written, where the bombs were born, where the rage simmered for years without a single neighbor noticing. Ted didn't just live off the grid, he vanished into it. He moved here in 1969, walking away from a promising academic career as a mathematics professor at UC Berkeley. One day he was lecturing on complex equations. The next he was chopping wood and glaring at society through the trees. He built the cabin with his brother, back when they still spoke, and never looked back. No power, no plumbing, just books, tools, a wood stove, and a mind spiraling into obsession. And right now, Ted's hunched over his workbench, putting the finishing touches on another bomb. He's perfected the craft, each device deadlier than the last. There's even one already wrapped and tucked under the bed, waiting to be sent. But here's the irony. For all his brilliance, for all the years he spent one step ahead, he's about to get caught, because the smartest killer in America made one very human mistake. Ted Kaczynski is born in 1942 into a regular Polish-American family, living in the suburbs of Chicago. Nothing flashy, just a small house, working-class parents, and a younger brother who adores him. His mum and dad are the intellectual type, lovers of books, nature, and long discussions about politics. Strict, yes, but not unkind. At least that's the version they tell later. It doesn't take long to realize Ted isn't like other kids. The boy is sharp, off-the-charts intelligent. By age 6, he's solving problems most adults would fumble. So of course his parents do what ambitious parents do. They speed things up. Skip one grade, then another. Ted's now 2 years younger than everyone in class and still finishing every test with time to spare. Socially, he's a little stiff. Awkward around girls, too serious for his age. Confident, but in a way that edges into arrogance. Still, he's not some lonely, friendless ghost. He's got a decent little group. He laughs, plays music, goes camping with his family, and dives into books like they're oxygen. Later, people who knew him back then don't describe a monster or a misfit. They remember a quiet, thoughtful kid, polite, a little distant but kind. A boy who seemed full of potential. And for a while, that's exactly what he was. At just 16 years old, Ted lands a spot at Harvard. On paper it sounds impressive. In reality, it's the start of his slow unraveling. Most freshmen feel out of place. Ted feels like he's been dropped on another planet. Suddenly, he's not the smartest person in the room anymore. Everyone here is sharp, but they're also rich, confident, polished. Ted shows up in bargain bin clothes with the manners of a working-class kid from Chicago, and people notice. Some students whisper about him, others don't bother whispering. Even professors look at him sideways. The jokes, the snide looks, the quiet exclusion, it eats at him. Years later, Ted will write angry letters to his mother, blaming her for sending him off so young. He wasn't ready. He never felt safe. His mood drops, his grades start slipping. Whatever energy he once had is gone. Classmates remember him as the weird guy in the dorm who didn't talk, didn't smile, didn't clean. His door slammed often. His room smelled like something had died under the bed. No one really knew him. And that's exactly how he wanted it. Ted has no idea, but someone's been watching him. His silence, his awkwardness, the way he floats through campus like a ghost. It's exactly what catches the attention of one man, Dr. Henry Murray. He isn't just any professor, he's a campus legend, with his own research building and a reputation as one of psychology's sharpest minds. To students, he's a genius. To the CIA, he's something even better, useful. Murray is building his final masterpiece, an experiment that's more like psychological warfare. And he's looking for the perfect subjects. Not confident students, not popular kids. No, he needs the fragile ones, the loners, the ones already halfway broken. Ted, without knowing it, has just been drafted. Anger over the Vietnam War boils in the streets. Anti-government groups are everywhere. Protest bombings are so common they start blending into the background noise. Every other week, another explosion shakes the city. The FBI even starts calling it the Belfast of North America, which isn't exactly a compliment. Radical leftist groups like the Weather Underground and the Symbionese Liberation Army proudly take credit for many of the blasts. They don't hide, they want to be known. So most of the time the message is loud and clear: angry people, angry bombs. Simple enough. Amid the chaos, the San Francisco FBI bomb unit stumbles onto something different, something colder. They link 12 homemade explosives to a single source, same type, same craftsmanship, same ghost. No clear motive, no fingerprints, no DNA. Just clean, clinical bombs showing up at universities and airports. They're packed into handmade wooden boxes, polished, intricate, almost beautiful, like art with a kill switch. No one sees who drops them off, no groups step up to claim responsibility. The targets? Professors, tech workers, airline execs. No pattern, no logic, just mayhem. The FBI gives the ghost a name, Unabomber, short for University and Airline Bomber. The world will know him by a different name soon. At this point, the body count is rising. 1 dead, 20 injured, 5 states, 0 connections. The Unabomber's targets are a strange mix: campus security, grad students, professors, a secretary, a tech exec, even airline passengers. No obvious thread, just normal people opening boxes and getting blown apart. Some survive, but barely. The first to die is Hugh Scruton. It's 1985. He owns a computer store in Sacramento. No ties to airlines, no ties to universities. So why him? Somewhere out in the woods, Ted reads about the man he just killed and laughs. The FBI's dangling $25,000 for any tips, and he's flattered. Not bad for one guy working solo in a tiny wooden box with no power, no plumbing, and no phone. Hard to picture now. These days, if you lose Wi-Fi for 10 minutes, you start spiraling. But back in his Montana cabin, Ted has all the essentials: snowshoes, hand-drawn maps, a wobbly chair he built himself, a typewriter, and enough books to open a library. There are scavenged parts, glass jars of chemicals, piles of tools. He's got wigs, sunglasses, and shoes with hidden compartments, all part of the act. The place is bursting at the seams, but every item has its spot. He might be crazy, but he's not messy. The FBI is out of ideas. 0 solid leads, 0 progress, and in the end they won't actually catch him themselves. The Unabomber stays way ahead of them. Every step of the way, they chase ghost trails, waste mountains of money, and burn through years of manpower. They're baffled. Why these targets? What's the pattern? The bombs are too good, too carefully built, too exacting to be random. There has to be a reason. They just can't see it yet. 1987. Finally, something. A woman in Salt Lake City spots a strange guy dropping a package near a computer store. Hoodie, shades, mustache. The classic crime uniform. Cops turn her memory into a sketch and plaster it everywhere. For once, the Unabomber is on paper, and just like that, he vanishes. No more bombs, no more letters, nothing. 5 full years of silence. The public moves on, but the FBI doesn't. They know he's still out there, just underground, waiting, improving. And when he comes back, he'll be deadlier than ever. Back in the woods, Ted's not just sharpening wires and testing chemicals, he's sharpening words. The next bombs will hit harder, but so will the message. Because Ted doesn't just want destruction, he wants to be understood. In the cramped dark of his cabin, he's typing what will become his 35,000-word manifesto. A screed against technology, progress, and everything he thinks is poisoning modern life. In his mind, this isn't terrorism, it's philosophy wrapped in shrapnel. Harvard, 1958. The US is shifting fast. The stiff collars of the 1950s are giving way to protest songs, rockets in the sky, and a Cold War growing colder by the minute. Paranoia reigns. Washington is terrified that enemy regimes have cracked the code on brainwashing. So America's response is simple: do it first, and do it better. Deep in the shadows, US intelligence launches secret mind control experiments. They're obsessed with finding a truth serum. Maybe LSD is the key. Or maybe the answer lies in hypnosis, sensory torture, or flooding someone's system with drugs until they forget who they are. In come the war criminals, Nazi scientists, smuggled out of Europe through Operation Paperclip, are quietly installed at US research labs. Their job? Help design the future of psychological warfare. What follows is more than a decade of human experimentation. Thousands of Americans, prisoners, hospital patients, and yes, college students are dosed, shocked, isolated, and broken, often without consent. When the scandal hits in the 1970s, the CIA scrambles to shred the records. The name of the program still echoes: MK Ultra. Students are ideal guinea pigs. Professors, many on the government's payroll, recruit them for personality studies that go far beyond the syllabus. Some faculty know who they're working for, some don't. But the CIA has its hands in everything. By the late 50s, the military is the biggest sponsor of psych research in the country, and Harvard is a hot zone. At the center of it all, a star professor named Henry Murray. His theories shape how the CIA recruits spies and breaks enemies. His charm pulls in eager students. And one of those students, lonely, brilliant, and just 16 years old, is named Ted Kaczynski. When 17-year-old Ted ends up in Dr. Murray's office, the man across from him isn't just a professor, he's a legend. Henry Murray is nearing retirement, and he's planning one last study. His biggest, darkest, and most personal experiment yet. Funded quietly by intelligence agencies, the goal is to find out what it takes to psychologically fracture a young, brilliant mind. In other words, how do you break someone smart? Ted and 21 other Harvard students are invited to take part. It sounds harmless. They're asked to write a personal essay, something deeply honest, core beliefs, moral principles, what they live by. Then comes the twist. They're told they'll be having a friendly debate with another student. What really happens is far more brutal. Murray's true goal is to see how different types of young men respond to extreme pressure. On one side, healthy, confident high achievers. On the other, students who seem lost, cynical, or emotionally fragile. Ted, already isolated and showing signs of depression, is almost certainly chosen for the second group. He doesn't know it yet, but he's just been drafted into something far more sinister than a class project. Ted's essay stands out, bleak, brooding, and far more hopeless than the others. It hints at something already fractured before the experiment even starts. He's also the youngest in the group, and the poorest. The students are told it's a simple personality study. That's a lie. This is where the real test begins. Their essays are handed over to professional interrogators, law students trained to manipulate, provoke, and dismantle. Their mission to attack the subject's core beliefs with surgical cruelty. One by one, the students are dragged into harshly lit rooms. They're ridiculed, insulted, and psychologically picked apart. Electrodes track their reactions as their sense of self is slowly dismantled. And then, as if once wasn't enough, they're forced to relive these humiliations on film again and again for years. Murray himself later admits the point was to inflict psychological pain. He was obsessed with the effects of stress and control. Some say he enjoyed it. Many participants say the experience left a lasting scar. But Ted's reaction is in a league of its own. His stress levels spike higher than anyone's. His records show signs of deep internal collapse. He's not just a volunteer in a lab. He's the most damaged subject in the entire program. Ted Kaczynski got MK Ultra. Yes, the same MK Ultra that pumped prisoners full of LSD and used electroshock therapy on unsuspecting civilians. You can read it on CIA.gov or in declassified documents from the time. People often say the CIA created the Unabomber, but it's not that simple. None of the other students in the study became murderers. The trauma may have sharpened Ted's rage, but it didn't invent it. Some psychologists think it triggered mental illness. Others say Ted was never insane, just deeply angry and dangerously brilliant. Ted himself always denied the experiments had any lasting effect. He didn't want the world to see him as broken or unstable. He wanted the bombings to be viewed as ideological, not emotional. He saw madness as a way for the world to ignore his message. Ted's obsession with the collapse of society starts quietly. He grows more convinced that industrial technology isn't just flawed, it's fatal. He believes machines are stripping away our humanity, our freedom, and any real connection to nature. The planet is choking, people are miserable, and technology, in his mind, is the reason. To Ted, anyone pushing tech forward becomes the problem. Researchers, CEOs, engineers. He calls them the technician class. He starts having fantasies, dark, vengeful ones. Fantasies about rebellion, about rejecting the world and its systems of control. He dreams of slipping away and living beyond society's reach. After Harvard, Ted earns his PhD in mathematics at the University of Michigan. He's brilliant. Brilliant enough to land a job as the youngest professor ever hired at UC Berkeley. His students don't really like him, but his work is groundbreaking. Ted could have had a remarkable academic career. But then, just like that, he quits. No warning. He tells his family he's sick of teaching future engineers. Those same engineers, he says, will go on to build machines that will ruin the world. So Ted checks out. He buys a small patch of land near Lincoln, Montana. He builds a one-room cabin with his brother. No power, no running water, no phone, just the woods, the cold, and his thoughts. And then, with no audience and no deadline, he begins to craft his first bomb. In 1993, after 6 long and silent years, the Unabomber reappears, and he's not holding back. 2 respected academics, one a computer scientist, the other a geneticist, open innocent-looking packages, no bigger than an old VHS tape. The devices explode in their hands. Both men survive, but with brutal injuries. Soon after, the New York Times receives a typed letter. It's cold, calculated, and signed by the Unabomber. He takes credit for the attacks and warns, more are coming. He wasn't bluffing. In 1994 and again in 1995, 2 more packages go out. One is sent to an advertising executive, the other to a forestry lobbyist. Neither survives. And just as the FBI feared, the bombs are evolving, deadlier, more precise. Most male bombers have a clear motive: ransom, revenge, ideology. There's usually a demand, but not here. For years, the Unabomber's bombs have come without requests, just destruction. They're not asking for anything. They're sending a message. 17 years into his bombing campaign, the Unabomber finally breaks his silence. He sends another typed letter, this time with a deal. He promises to stop the violence for good if his 56-page manifesto is published in a major newspaper. That one demand sparks chaos inside both the FBI and the editorial boardrooms. Should they really print the rantings of a killer? The FBI doesn't negotiate with terrorists, at least, not officially. But agents also believe he's serious. That this is what it was all for, a chance to be heard. Besides, they've got nothing. No name, no face. Maybe someone out there will recognize his voice in the writing. The decision is made. The Washington Post gets the job. Fewer readers than the Times, and easier for law enforcement to monitor the newsstands. They think public interest will be high. They're wrong. It's astronomical. Papers sell out nationwide. People line up just to read the words of a phantom. It opens with a sentence that echoes through history. The Industrial Revolution and its consequences have been a disaster for the human race. It's not just a manifesto, it's a confession. A 56-page scream into the void. A call to dismantle modern society brick by brick. But in writing it, the Unabomber does more than share his ideas. He gives away something far more valuable, pieces of himself. David and Ted, 7 years apart, totally different personalities, but growing up they were close. Really close. They sent long letters full of deep arguments about philosophy and society. They didn't always agree, but they understood each other. Both were suspicious of modern tech. Both dreamed of simpler lives. David even tried living off-grid in a cabin for a while, just like his brother. But David didn't build bombs. When the manifesto gets published, David hasn't heard from Ted in years. Ted cut him off after David got married. No warning, no explanation, just silence. Linda, David's wife, a philosophy professor herself, never even met Ted. But she gets a weird feeling. The writing in the paper, it reminds her of David's stories. The timeline of the bombings overlaps with Ted's travels, and the ideas? A little too familiar. She says it out loud one day. Your brother might be the Unabomber. David shuts it down. No way. Ted loved animals. He used to cry when squirrels got hurt. He's not a killer. At first, David avoids the manifesto. From the very first paragraph, he feels it. The cadence, the phrasing, the logic, the rage. This is Ted's voice. As he keeps reading, his stomach sinks. Every sentence is like a fingerprint. There's no doubt. Ted is the Unabomber. David wrestles with the choice. Turn in his own brother? End the madness? He does. He contacts the FBI. Quietly. Carefully. Ted once predicted, "They'll paint me as sick. They need to. It's the only way they can make sense of me." He wasn't wrong. Lincoln, Montana, April 1996. Thanks to David's tip, the feds are quietly crawling around town, trying not to spook the local wildlife or Ted. They ask questions, knock on doors, gather scraps of gossip, anything to back up the theory that the weird guy in the shack might be the country's most elusive serial bomber. Problem is, all they really have is a pile of Ted's old letters and a manifesto that reads like his diary. Not enough for a warrant. Definitely not enough for handcuffs. Still, the rumors start swirling. Locals whisper that their neighborhood hermit, the one who grunts at the grocery store once a year, is the Unabomber. The plan is simple. Lure Ted out of his shack, slip inside, and pray he hasn't wired the place to blow sky high. Everyone figures it's a coin toss. Ted, blissfully unaware, answers the door when someone shows up saying they're surveyors. He's not expecting visitors. He's mid-project, grinding down aluminum blocks for bomb powder, coated in metallic dust like a ghost of the scrapyard. He's all bones and beard, dressed in whatever fabric hasn't completely disintegrated. A walking cautionary tale. Too bad for him. That's exactly how he'll be photographed. That image, wild hair, haunted eyes, clothes begging for mercy, circles the globe. Not great PR if you're trying to look sane. Inside the cabin, agents find 40,000 pages of ramblings, blueprints, and math equations. Most of it's in code, way more complicated than anything the KGB ever bothered with. Luckily for them, Ted also left the decryption key right there. Maybe he thought the FBI needed a little help. Under the bed, there's a bomb, fully built, labeled, addressed, ready for shipment to a Dallas aerospace company. Now the FBI has everything. They shut the place down and drag Ted into custody. He doesn't deny the writings are his. He actually wrote the confessions to prove he wasn't insane, just angry, brilliant, and full of purpose. But his lawyers and family? They beg to differ. They claim he's mentally ill. They'll say anything to dodge the death penalty. Ted hates this. He tries to fire his lawyers, wants to speak for himself. He'd rather be executed than labeled crazy. In the end, he pleads guilty, gets life in prison. Even behind bars, Ted doesn't shut up. He writes 2 books and keeps up a busy letter schedule with fans, journalists, and people who really should have known better. Oddly enough, prison brings him closer to people. He befriends Timothy McVeigh, the guy behind the Oklahoma City bombing. The two bond over mutual apocalyptic vibes before McVeigh heads off to death row. And then, Ted finds love. Yes, really. After a lifetime of barely talking to women, he becomes the darling of a strange corner of the postal system. Dozens of romantic letters pour in. One woman, a schoolteacher, captures his heart. They never touch, just letters. Visiting booths, classical music he composes for her. She dies of lung cancer. Years later, Ted develops cancer too. In June 2023, he ends his life at age 81. A quiet ending for a man who spent decades screaming through explosives. This isn't a political revolution, Ted once wrote. We're not here to topple governments. We're here to blow up the whole machine. And he meant it. Decades after his arrest, Ted Kaczynski remains a strange kind of icon. His big idea? That technology is making life worse, not better. That machines, since the days of steam engines and factory whistles, have stolen our freedom, wrecked the planet, and turned us into depressed little cogs. The manifesto isn't your average rant. Some parts hit hard. He predicted mass surveillance, climate breakdown, social alienation, and sure, he wasn't wrong about all of it. Plenty of people, especially online, agree with at least a few of his complaints. Back when he was caught, Time magazine said, "There's a little bit of the Unabomber in most of us." Today, some folks still treat him like a dark prophet. On TikTok, teens joke about Uncle Ted when the world feels especially bleak. Of course, not everyone quoting him is joking. Anders Behring Breivik, the far-right terrorist who murdered 77 people in Norway, quoted Ted's manifesto word for word in his own. Here's the thing, though. Most people who are mad about climate change don't build bombs. Ted did. If you find his arguments interesting, maybe look up Jacques Ellul, the French philosopher Ted borrowed from. Ellul never told anyone to kill. He just talked about tech and freedom. And if you really want the full picture, read Ted's private journals. That's where the mask slips. That's where the rage gets personal. Yes, he hated industrial society, but he also hated everything. He admitted to feeling joy while hurting people. He wrote about killing dogs for barking too much. He hated leftists, hated doctors, hated women. He had violent fantasies about killing women who ignored him. He even dreamed of murdering his toddler neighbor for crying too loudly. He called technology a form of slavery, then waxed nostalgic about simpler times that awkwardly involved actual slavery. Despite calling himself a lover of nature, Ted mocked environmentalists in his diary. He littered on purpose, poached animals, illegally chopped down trees on protected land. So yes, the Unabomber had a manifesto, but he also had a lot of anger, and it's pretty clear that some of his ideas were just an excuse to blow things up. Ted Kaczynski believed technology was destroying the world, and he killed to prove it. But history's worst damage doesn't always come from bombs or manifestos. Sometimes all it takes is one stupid decision. It's the early 1200s. The Mongols are busy conquering their way across China, and for once they're actually not at war with someone. That someone is the Khwarezmian Empire. Relations are surprisingly peaceful. They've even fought on the same side before. A real feel-good story until it isn't. One day, Genghis Khan sends a caravan of merchants into Khwarezmian territory. Standard stuff. But instead of greeting them with open arms and cold drinks, the local governor robs them and kills everyone in the group. Just regular hospitality, apparently. Still, Genghis doesn't go nuclear right away. Instead, he does something shockingly reasonable. He sends a diplomatic team to the Shah, politely asking him to punish the rogue governor and make things right. The Shah listens carefully, nods thoughtfully, and then kills one of the ambassadors. He sends the severed head back with the others, like a party favor from the world's worst summit. Now, this was a huge mistake. In Mongol culture, killing a messenger isn't just rude, it's a declaration of war. A very stupid, very final kind of war. Genghis Khan is done being reasonable. He stops fighting in China, turns west, and unleashes the full force of the Mongol army. Entire cities are flattened. The Khwarezmian Empire is erased. And that's just the beginning. Even the lowest death estimates are in the millions. The Mongols don't stop after avenging the caravan, they keep going, straight into Persia, the Middle East, and parts of Europe. The destruction is legendary. If the Shah had just apologized and handed over the murderous governor, maybe, just maybe, none of this would have happened. But instead, he decapitated a diplomat and started one of the most destructive military campaigns in human history. All because he couldn't say sorry. In March 1941, the German submarine U-1110 set off on its first mission. Things started out well, they damaged 2 Allied ships, but then they accidentally fired their own deck gun too close, injuring some of their own crew. Not exactly the best debut. Still, they gave it another shot in April. The second mission went better until it didn't. U-1110 managed to sink several Allied ships in the North Atlantic, but on May 9th, things went sideways. A group of British warships started chasing them. This was part of a plan the British later named Operation Primrose, which sounds more like a gardening project than a naval trap. The British dropped depth charges and badly damaged the submarine. U-110 was forced to surface. The crew came up expecting a fight, and the British, thinking the Germans might go out in a blaze of glory, opened fire, only to realize the crew was surrendering. That's when something strange happened. German commander Fritz Julius Lemp noticed something. The sub wasn't sinking. Which it definitely should have been, considering it held one of Nazi Germany's top military secrets, the Enigma machine. Lemp tried to swim back to the sub to destroy the device, but he never made it. No one really knows what happened. Drowned, shot, vanished into the cold Atlantic. Either way, he didn't get the job done. British sailors boarded the ghostly U-boat and hit the jackpot. In the year 774, Byzantine Emperor Constantine V decided it was a good time to invade Bulgaria. It was not. The campaign flopped. But even though the soldiers didn't get far, Constantine had something even better than swords: spies. Hidden deep inside the Bulgarian court in the city of Pliska, Byzantine agents were quietly feeding him everything: secrets, plans, pillow talk, probably lunch orders. It gave Constantine a serious advantage. But the Bulgarian ruler, a guy named Telerig, started to notice a pattern. Every time he made a move, the Byzantines were already a step ahead. Either Constantine was psychic or someone was leaking. Telerig figured it out. He had a mole problem. A whole bouquet of them, actually. So he hatched a plan. He wrote to Constantine and said, "Hey, I've seen the light. I want to defect to Constantinople and join your team, but I need the names of your agents here, so I can protect them while I escape." And somehow, Constantine believed him. The emperor actually sent over a full list of his secret agents. First names, last names, probably job titles. Telerig thanked him and then executed them all. Just like that, Constantine's entire spy network vanished. Not with a war, not with a battle, just with one stupid letter and a little too much trust. Günter Schabowski had just been handed a new job, spokesperson for East Germany's top political committee, the Politburo. Basically, he was the guy who now had to talk to the press without accidentally starting a revolution. That didn't go well. The government had just discussed a possible plan to loosen the rules about travelling to West Germany. It wasn't supposed to be announced yet, but during a press conference Schabowski brought it up anyway, like he was talking about the weather. Then a reporter asked when the new policy would take effect. Schabowski flipped through his notes. Papers shuffled. Awkward silence. Then he blurted out, "As far as I know, immediately." And just like that, history turned on a shrug. People in East Berlin heard the news and assumed the border was open after nearly 30 years of being sealed off. They rushed the wall. Hundreds, then thousands. The guards had no clue what was going on. They hadn't been told anything. But they'd also watched the press conference. With no orders and no real plan, the guards gave up. They opened the gates. By midnight, the wall wasn't just open. It was coming down. People climbed it, danced on it, hugged strangers, cried, laughed. After decades of division, the impossible was happening. Did Schabowski mess up, or was it on purpose? No one really knows. But either way, the Cold War got cracked wide open, thanks to a guy who couldn't find the right piece of paper. One of the first grand ideas in Mao Zedong's Great Leap Forward was to declare war, not on countries but on animals. It was called the Four Pests Campaign. The enemies? Rats, flies, mosquitoes and sparrows. The reason? They spread disease and ruined crops, or so Mao believed. But the worst part by far was the war on birds, especially the Eurasian tree sparrow. These tiny birds were blamed for eating too much grain, so the whole country was ordered to fight back. Millions of people were told to smash sparrow eggs, tear down nests, and chase the birds through the skies banging pots and pans. They made so much noise that the sparrows couldn't land anywhere. They flew and flew until they dropped dead from exhaustion. It was chaos. School children skipped class to hunt sparrows. Cities echoed with clanging metal. And the campaign worked. Sparrows almost disappeared entirely. And then came the real disaster. With no sparrows left, insect swarms exploded, especially locusts. They had no predators now, and tore through China's crops like wildfire. What followed was famine on a historic scale. Bad farming science, ruined harvests, and this birdless apocalypse combined into one of the deadliest tragedies in human history. Tens of millions starved. By 1960, the government gave up on the bird war. They quietly swapped targets. Sparrows were off the list. The new enemy? Bedbugs. But the damage was done. In 1921, at General Motors, a man named Thomas Midgley Jr. found a solution to a common problem. Engines kept making annoying knocking sounds. His fix? Add a chemical called tetraethyl lead, also known as TLL, to gasoline. It worked like magic. No more knocking. But there was a catch. TLL was toxic. Factory workers making it started hallucinating, falling into madness, even dying. One worker ran out of the lab screaming about insects crawling on his skin. Others simply collapsed. But the fuel was promoted anyway, and soon it was sold worldwide. Midgley didn't stop there. A few years later, in the late 1920s, he helped create Freon, the first major CFC. It was a cooling chemical used in refrigerators and spray cans. Another miracle. Another hit. But decades later, scientists realized these chemicals were punching holes in the ozone layer, the shield that protects us from the sun's radiation. UV rays poured through, skin cancer rates climbed, ecosystems suffered. Both inventions were seen as smart at the time. But both caused global damage on a scale almost no other person ever matched. A historian once said, Midgley changed the Earth's atmosphere more than any other human in history. Then came one final invention. In 1944, after polio left him paralyzed, Midgley built a complex system of ropes and pulleys to help others lift him in and out of bed. One day, he became tangled in the cords and died. Some say it was an accident, others whisper it wasn't. We were seconds from nuclear war, and hardly anyone knows it. It was just past midnight during the Cuban Missile Crisis, the most dangerous moment of the Cold War. The US and the Soviet Union stood toe-to-toe, fingers hovering over launch buttons. At a US base in Duluth, Minnesota, a guard saw something move near the fence, a shadowy figure climbing. At the time, the military believed any Soviet attack might begin with sabotage, an inside job to disable US nukes before launch. The guard fired his weapon and slammed the sabotage alarm. Instantly, alarms went off at all the nearby bases. But something went wrong at a base in Wisconsin, Volk Field. A wiring error caused the wrong alarm to sound. Instead of a standard sabotage alert, they got the big one, the klaxon. The klaxon meant launch. It told pilots to scramble and take off with nuclear weapons. These weren't drills. The pilots were already at DEFCON 3, just one step below all-out war. They had been told, no practice, no fake alerts at this level. So they ran to their planes, assuming the world was ending. Engines roared, the nukes were live. But someone caught the mistake. An officer jumped in a car and sped across the tarmac, waving his arms and shouting. He reached the pilots just before takeoff. The plane stopped. Crisis averted. The figure that triggered it all, not a spy, not sabotage, it was a bear. A confused, furry bear climbed a fence and nearly ended the world. In 1452, a man named Orban arrived at the gates of Constantinople. He wasn't a soldier or a noble or a priest. He was something rarer at the time, an engineer, a master metalworker from the Kingdom of Hungary, and he claimed he had a game changer. Orban came with blueprints, he came with measurements, he came with swagger. He told Emperor Constantine XI he could build a cannon, but not just any cannon. This one would be so big it could fire stone balls the size of barrels, each heavier than a full-grown horse. A single shot could crack the walls of any city, including the massive triple-layered stone walls that had kept Constantinople standing for over 1,000 years. It wasn't just a cannon, it was a doomsday device. The emperor was impressed. Who wouldn't be? But there was a problem. The empire was broke. Not just short on cash, flat out scraping the bottom of the barrel. The treasury was empty, supplies were running low, the military was understaffed, and the court couldn't spare gold for a science project, even one that sounded this good. They told Orban thanks but no thanks. They said they appreciated the offer. They just couldn't afford him. So Orban packed his bags, and he didn't go home. He went to the Ottomans. Sultan Mehmed II, the teenage ruler of the rising Ottoman Empire, didn't need to be asked twice. He welcomed Orban with open arms, gave him a generous salary, endless resources, and total freedom. "Build what you want," he said. "I'll handle the rest." 3 months later, Orban delivered. The result was a monster of bronze and iron known as the basilic. It was 30 feet long. The barrel was wide enough for a grown man to crawl inside. The cannonballs it fired weighed over half a ton. It took 60 oxen to move it, and a team of hundreds to set it up. It needed oil, wood, ropes, winches, and hours of prep time between each shot. But when it fired, people miles away could hear it. Windows shattered, ground trembled, walls cracked, and in April 1453, the Ottomans brought it to the walls of Constantinople. It was the beginning of the end. For 6 weeks, the basilic pounded the city's legendary fortifications. Shot after shot, it chipped away at the stone. The Byzantines did what they could, rebuilding at night, reinforcing weak spots, launching counterattacks. But the damage was relentless. Other cannons joined in. Orban had also trained Ottoman crews to build smaller versions of his design. Together, the siege weapons turned once impenetrable defences into rubble. By May, the Ottomans had a breach. On May 29th, they stormed the city. After 1,000 years of surviving sieges, plagues, invasions, and crusades, Constantinople finally fell. The Byzantine Empire was gone. And the weapon that helped destroy it had been invented by the man they turned away. Some said Orban died in the final days of the siege, crushed when one of his own cannons exploded. Others say he lived to see the city fall, and was honoured by the Sultan. Either way, he built a machine that changed history. The Byzantines told him no. The Ottomans handed him the keys to the future. Kim Jong-nam was supposed to be the next supreme leader. The eldest son of Kim Jong-il, the future heir, already holding powerful roles in the Ministry of Public Security, groomed to rule, building North Korea's IT infrastructure, towing the party line. Then, in 2001, he tried to sneak into Tokyo Disneyland. Seriously. He used a fake Dominican passport under the name Pang Shong, which literally translates to Fat Bear. Japan caught him. The photos went global. The heir to the Hermit Kingdom, trying to go on Space Mountain. North Korea was humiliated. His father, Kim Jong-il, cancelled a state visit to China in embarrassment. Jongnam's future evaporated. He was quietly exiled. He wandered between Beijing, Macau, and Southeast Asia, casinos, interviews, champagne. It was a strange fall from grace. The Playboy Prince, now giving off-the-cuff thoughts to reporters and telling anyone who'd listen that North Korea needed reform. He became a problem. By 2010, his younger half-brother, Kim Jong-un, had been picked as the successor. Worse, some believed Jongnam was talking to the CIA, so Kim Jong-un issued a standing kill order. Jongnam survived a few close calls. He even wrote a letter to his brother. It didn't work. February 13, 2017, Kuala Lumpur Airport. He's walking through the terminal when two women smear a chemical on his face. He dies minutes later. Publius Quintilius Varus thought he had a handle on things. A Roman general charged with pacifying Germania, a place of thick woods, cold rain, and tribes that didn't love being liberated. But Varus wasn't worried. He had Arminius, a trusted officer, a rising star, Roman-trained, Roman uniformed, but also very much a Germanic noble, and very much a traitor. That summer in 9 AD, Varus and his 20,000 troops were heading back to their winter base. Easy march. Until Arminius showed up with a tip. Some rebellious villagers nearby needed disciplining. Nothing big but urgent. Varus believed him, so he led his legions off the main road and into the Teutoburg forest. A tight, swampy, unfamiliar tangle of trees and fog. Roman formations fell apart. Rain turned the paths to mud. Visibility dropped. Horses panicked. And then the ambush began. Arminius disappeared. Germanic warriors, thousands of them, erupted from the woods. They weren't just fighting, they were hunting. They'd planned the terrain, planted defenses, cut escape routes. Over several days, the legions were slaughtered in waves. By the end, nearly every Roman soldier was dead. Varus fell on his sword. The survivors were enslaved or worse. Rome was shattered. Emperor Augustus reportedly screamed, "Varus, give me back my legions." The legion numbers 17, 18, 19 were never used again. Rome never tried to conquer north of the Rhine again. And centuries later, the Germanic tribes from that very region would march back, this time into Rome. In the months before D-Day, German generals were arguing like academics at a failing university. Everyone had a theory. Field Marshal Gerd von Rundstedt was convinced the Allied invasion would come at Pas de Calais, the shortest distance from Britain, loaded with ports, and a straight shot to Germany. Rommel, the Desert Fox himself, was in charge of coastal defences. He also suspected Calais, but kept muttering about Normandy just in case. No one really listened. And then there was Hitler. Hitler did what he did best, ignored expert advice, and made everything worse. He split the panzer divisions in the most ineffective way imaginable. Not close enough to help Rommel quickly, not far enough back to serve Rundstedt's mobile reserve idea. The result? 2 brilliant generals, 0 proper backup. Meanwhile, the Allies ran one of the most successful scams in history, Operation Fortitude. They built fake armies out of rubber tanks and radio chatter, making Calais look like the obvious invasion point. It worked. Even when Allied troops hit the beaches of Normandy on June 6, 1944, German high command still thought it was a diversion. Rommel wasn't even home that day. He'd gone inland to bring flowers to his wife for her birthday. Other officers were off duty too, thanks to a conveniently gloomy weather forecast. Rundstedt tried to respond fast. He asked Hitler for permission to move the tanks, but Hitler, perhaps in deep philosophical thought, or just asleep, delayed. Again, by the time the counterattack was approved, Allied airstrikes had chewed up German roads, trucks, and communications. The defense plan, if you could call it that, collapsed under its own confusion. Still, German troops fought hard, but the Allies established 5 beachheads and unloaded more than 150,000 soldiers by nightfall. Rommel, always the realist, tried to warn Hitler the war in the West was lost. Hitler didn't want to hear it. Then, on July 17th, Rommel's car was strafed by Allied aircraft. He was nearly killed. That left Germany with no Desert Fox, no plan, and no real chance of stopping the slow, grinding end that had just begun. In 1867, the Russian Empire decided it was time to offload some real estate. Specifically, 586,000 square miles of frozen wilderness on the edge of the known world. They sold Alaska to the United States for $7.2 million, roughly 2 cents an acre, which is either a steal or a disaster depending on who you ask. Russia had just finished losing the Crimean War and wasn't feeling very confident. They were convinced they couldn't protect Alaska in another fight, especially with the British just a stone's throw away in Canada. So they thought, why not sell it to the Americans, ruin Britain's plans, and make a little cash before it's taken by force? The Americans said, sure, why not? US Secretary of State William Seward signed the deal, and people immediately laughed at him. They called it Seward's Folly, a scheme to buy an uninhabitable icebox populated mostly by seals. Critics asked what could possibly come from this barren, frozen lump. Well, it turns out oil and gold and a coast with Pacific access, and enough land to make Texas feel insecure. Alaska would eventually prove to be absurdly rich in natural resources, just not immediately. Seward didn't live long enough to enjoy the vindication, but history has a long memory. The joke, as it turned out, was on Russia. In 3230 BC, Alexander the Great dropped dead in Babylon. Just 32 years old, he left behind the biggest empire the ancient world had ever seen, and not a single adult to inherit it. His only biological heir, a baby still in the womb. His half-brother, Philip Aridaeus, technically existed, but was likely schizophrenic and barely functional, so not exactly a strong candidate. Alexander had conquered Persia, Egypt, parts of India, and more, but he'd never stopped to write a will. He ruled everything, and planned for nothing. Enter the Diadochi, his top generals, supposedly loyal. But once the funeral incense wore off, they started ripping the empire to shreds. Over the next 50 years, these men who had once fought side by side betrayed, backstabbed and butchered each other in what became known as the Wars of the Diadochi. The fighting was brutal. Alliances flipped weakly, cities burned, fortunes wasted. Alexander's teenage son, Alexander IV, was eventually murdered. So was his widow. So was his mother. Basically, if you shared DNA with Alexander, you had a short and paranoid life. By 281 BC, the dream was gone. Alexander's empire was reduced to a patchwork of squabbling kingdoms. The dream of East meeting West collapsed into border skirmishes, bitter dynasties, and endless war. All because history's greatest conqueror never bothered to figure out who was supposed to rule after him. Christopher Columbus didn't discover the New World because he was smart. He discovered it because he couldn't do math. By the late 1400s, educated people already knew the Earth was round. Eratosthenes had figured that out nearly 1,700 years earlier, and his estimate of the planet's size was remarkably accurate. Columbus didn't like that estimate. He insisted the Earth was much smaller than it really was. He also believed Asia stretched way farther east than it actually does. Based on this fantasy geography, he calculated that Japan was just a few weeks' sail west of Spain. Most experts rightly thought he was out of his mind. They warned the trip would take months and probably end in starvation or mutiny. But Columbus was confident, charismatic and persistent. Eventually, Queen Isabella and King Ferdinand agreed to fund his voyage. They were broke from war, desperate for trade routes and maybe a little too impressed by his confidence. Here's the twist. If Columbus had used the correct math, he never would have gone. The journey to Asia by sailing west was wildly impractical, unless a giant continent happened to be blocking the way. And that's exactly what happened. Instead of reaching Japan, he crashed into the Bahamas. He had no idea he'd found a new world. He died thinking he was just off the coast of Asia. The voyage that changed history happened not because of brilliance, but because Columbus was very, very wrong. In 1919, the Treaty of Versailles officially ended World War I. But instead of building peace, it lit the fuse for the next disaster. The treaty forced Germany to accept full blame for the war, give up huge pieces of land, shrink its army to a skeleton force, and pay billions in reparations to the Allied powers. It wasn't just harsh, it was humiliating. The worst part? Many Germans thought peace talks would be based on President Woodrow Wilson's 14 points, a more generous plan. But when they arrived, they were handed something much closer to a punishment than a treaty. British economist John Maynard Keynes saw it coming. He called the deal a Carthaginian peace, a reference to ancient Rome's total destruction of Carthage. He warned that crushing Germany like this would only cause more chaos later. And he was right. Inside Germany, people were furious. Millions of ethnic Germans suddenly found themselves living in new countries. The loss of pride, power, and land stirred up something toxic: resentment, rage, and extreme nationalism. In the years that followed, those feelings only got worse, especially when the Great Depression hit. That anger helped fuel the rise of a failed artist turned fascist, Adolf Hitler. The treaty didn't directly cause World War II, but it poured gasoline on a country already burning with bitterness. Versailles didn't just end one war, it helped set the stage for the next. After the nightmare of World War I, France had one big idea: build a wall so strong the Germans could never break through again. That wall became the Maginot Line. It wasn't meant to stop a war completely, just to slow down a German invasion, buy time for the French army to mobilize, and hopefully keep the bloodshed off French soil. It was a fortress line stretching from Switzerland to Luxembourg. Bunkers, tunnels, artillery, all built deep into the earth, but it stopped short. It didn't cover the forests of the Ardennes or the long border with Belgium. Military planners thought those places were too rough, too wooded, too natural to be worth worrying about. No way tanks could roll through there, right? France had its reasons. Germany was rearming, and France couldn't count on the British or the Americans to help. With a smaller post-war population and fewer young men to fight, French leaders put their faith in concrete and steel instead of speed and risk. Then came 1940. Hitler's army stormed through Belgium and cut straight through the supposedly impassable Ardennes. The Maginot Line wasn't defeated, it was simply ignored. The Germans slipped around it and took France from behind. To this day, historians debate whether the line was smart or foolish. But one thing is certain, it was built to stop the last war, not the next one. In June 1941, Nazi Germany launched Operation Barbarossa, an invasion of the Soviet Union so massive it was supposed to end the war fast. Hitler believed the Red Army would collapse in weeks. Instead, he opened the gates to a nightmare. At first it worked. German tanks rolled across the border, smashing Soviet defenses. Entire armies were trapped, destroyed, or marched off to prison camps. By autumn, German troops neared Moscow and had left destruction from the Baltic to the Black Sea. But then cracks appeared. Supply lines stretched thin, winter came early, Soviet resistance hardened, and the Germans had no winter gear, because the war was supposed to be over by then. Leningrad didn't fall, it starved. 1 million civilians died in the siege. Near Moscow, German troops saw the Kremlin spires before being pushed back by Siberian soldiers in white camouflage. By year's end, Germany had lost over 800,000 men. Barbarossa was unraveling. Hitler, furious, took control of the army himself. It didn't help. Instead of crushing the Soviet Union, Germany got trapped in a war of attrition. The Eastern Front became the bloodiest in history, and when it was over, the Soviets weren't gone. They had marched west, deep into Europe, drawing a new line that would divide the world for the next 50 years. June 28, 1914, a sunny morning in Sarajevo. Archduke Franz Ferdinand, heir to the Austro-Hungarian throne, is riding through town in an open-topped car. He's in town for a goodwill visit, but tensions are high. Bosnia had recently been annexed, and not everyone's thrilled, especially not a group of young Serb nationalists, teenagers, radicalized, angry, armed. One of them is 19-year-old Gavrilo Princip, sickly, quiet, and fully committed to Serbian independence. He and others have smuggled weapons in. The plan? Kill the Archduke. As the motorcade rolls through Sarajevo, things go sideways. One assassin throws a bomb, but it's mistimed. It bounces off the Archduke's car and explodes under the next one. Passengers and bystanders are injured. Franz is unharmed. Panic. The cars speed off. The attackers scatter. Franz, shaken, goes to the governor's mansion. Later, he insists on visiting the wounded. The route is quietly changed. But no one tells the driver. Just before noon, the car takes a wrong turn onto Franz Joseph Street. And standing there on the sidewalk is Princip. He's not waiting. He's not plotting. He's just grabbing a sandwich. After the failed attempt, he figured it was over. But now the very man he meant to kill is right in front of him. The car stalls. It doesn't move. Princip steps forward, fires twice. One bullet hits Franz in the neck. One hits his pregnant wife, Sophie, in the stomach. They both die in the car. It lasts less than 30 seconds. But the fallout consumes the next 4 years. Austria-Hungary blames Serbia. Russia mobilizes. Germany backs Austria. France backs Russia. Germany invades Belgium. Britain defends it. The entire web of alliances collapses into war. And it all started with a failed bombing, a wrong turn, and a sandwich. Some mistakes change history in an instant. Others take years to understand, if we ever understand them at all. But then there are moments that don't feel like mistakes at all. They just happen. No answers, no logic, just silence. like the night Flight 370 vanished. At Kuala Lumpur International Airport, the engines of a Boeing 777 begin to stir. It's March 8, 2014, just after midnight. The air is warm, heavy and still. Malaysia Airlines Flight 370 is getting ready to leave the gate. This is a daily routine even. A red-eye flight from Malaysia to Beijing. Nothing unusual, nothing to worry about. Inside the cockpit, Captain Zaharia Ahmad Shah runs through his pre-flight checks. He's experienced, quiet, methodical. Next to him sits First Officer Farik Abdul Hamid. Younger, still learning the ropes but fully certified. This is one of his last training flights. There are 10 crew members preparing the cabin. 227 passengers buckling in. Families, tourists, business travelers, people watching the safety video, people settling in for sleep, people thinking about their destination, not the journey. 42 minutes past midnight, the control tower gives the go-ahead. Flight 370 lifts off into the night. The runway lights fall away. The aircraft climbs steadily into darkness. At this moment, everything is normal. The radios are clear. The sky is calm. The flight path is locked in. Nobody knows that. In less than an hour, Flight 370 will vanish. Without a distress call, without a warning, without a trace. Less than an hour after takeoff, Flight 370 is cruising quietly over the South China Sea. It's 35,000 feet in the air. The weather is smooth. The sky is clear. The passengers are asleep, reading or counting the hours until morning. In the cockpit, there's a routine handoff ahead. The plane is about to leave Malaysian airspace and enter Vietnamese control. Kuala Lumpur air traffic control radios in with one last message, instructing the crew to contact Ho Chi Minh next. The response comes, "Good night, Malaysian 370. A minute and 43 seconds later, the plane is gone. Not from the sky, just from the radar. But that's enough. 1 second it's there, blinking like normal on screens in Kuala Lumpur, Ho Chi Minh and Bangkok. The next second, nothing. Commercial aircraft constantly broadcast their location using 2 transponders. For both of them to stop transmitting at the exact same time, something has to go very wrong or very deliberately. Controllers try to make contact. Radio calls go unanswered. Backup systems stay quiet. No distress signal. No emergency beacon. Nothing. By dawn, the scheduled landing in Beijing has passed. The terminal screen still says on time. Families begin to ask questions. Phones start to ring. Just like that, a passenger plane with 239 people aboard is no longer where it's supposed to be. The aircraft is declared missing, and the most expensive, confusing, surreal search in aviation history begins. At first, the search is focused where the plane was last seen, somewhere over the South China Sea, near the edge of Vietnamese airspace. Rescue crews sweep across the Gulf of Thailand, convinced the wreckage must be close by. But they find nothing. Not a seat cushion, not a drop of fuel, not a single clue. Then comes new information, this time from the Malaysian military. Unlike commercial radar, which depends on transponders to track planes, military radar works differently. It simply bounces signals off anything in the sky and watches what comes back. You don't need a cooperative aircraft, just a large one. After reviewing the data, officials realize something strange. Right after the plane vanished from civilian radar, it made a slight turn to the right, then a wide, deliberate curve to the left. It was turning around. The aircraft re-entered Malaysian airspace, silently, and flew straight back over the peninsula. No radio contact. No alerts. Just a silent ghost gliding through the night sky. Near the island of Penang, the jet made another right turn and began flying northwest, and then, somewhere over the Andaman Sea, it slipped out of radar range entirely. Days go by. Dozens of ships and aircraft comb the waters off Malaysia, Thailand and Indonesia. The Strait of Malacca is scanned. The Bay of Bengal, the coastlines. Nothing. No wreckage. No signal. No answers. While ships scanned the sea and satellites searched the surface, a team of investigators turned to something else entirely. A stream of quiet, invisible signals sent far above the clouds. Flight 370, like most modern airliners, carried a SATCOM terminal, a satellite communication system meant to relay messages between the plane and the ground. Before takeoff, the system logged in like normal. It pinged a ground station in Perth, Australia, and stayed quietly connected in the background. At first, everything looked fine. The data showed a healthy link. Then came silence. At some point, around the time the aircraft slipped off civilian radar, the satellite link went dead. No more signals. No explanation. But then, something strange. 3 minutes after the military radar lost the plane over the Andaman Sea, the ASATCOM system came back online. It logged back in, quietly re-establishing its connection. And then, for nearly 6 more hours, it stayed that way, connected but silent. During that time, 2 satellite phone calls were placed to the cockpit. The calls reached the plane, the system confirmed it, but nobody picked up. Meanwhile, the satellite kept checking in. Once an hour, it sent a simple message, like knocking on a locked door, just a signal to confirm the plane was still there. The plane knocked back. These were not messages in the normal sense, no location data, no GPS coordinates, but they carried something else, timing. Investigators realized they could measure the delay between each signal and its echo to estimate how far the plane was from the satellite at that moment. 7 pings, 7 rough distances, 7 arcs across the map. By layering these arcs with what they knew about the plane's speed, fuel limits and flight dynamics, a shape emerged, an enormous crescent sweeping across the southern Indian Ocean. It became known as the Southern Arc. Somewhere along it, the plane was believed to have gone down. With radar gone silent and satellite pings pointing south, the search turned toward one of the loneliest stretches of water on Earth. The coordinates led to the southern Indian Ocean, a place so remote, so empty, it didn't even have regular shipping lanes. Since the mystery now fell under their watch, the Australians took the lead. They gathered ships, planes and sonar buoys. Crews were briefed, grids were drawn, and then they set out. But this wasn't a simple detour. It took nearly a week just to reach the search zone. The ocean here doesn't wait, currents shift, winds howl, the water moves faster than wreckage can float. As days passed, the search zone was redrawn again and again, trying to account for the movement of time, debris and tide. Teams used new flight models. Oceanographers mapped the drift. Engineers calculated fuel burn, but the sea kept its silence. Over the coming weeks, a sprawling grid was swept clean. 4.5 million square kilometers of open ocean scanned from the sky and sea. Every blip, every whitecap, every oil sheen was checked, and still, nothing. The plane had vanished, and the ocean wasn't giving it back. In the absence of answers, investigators turned to sound. If the plane had hit the ocean with enough force, maybe, just maybe, that impact had sent vibrations rippling through the water. Somewhere, on the quiet ocean floor, a machine might have heard it. They checked the hydrophones. 4 underwater listening stations, part of a global network designed to detect nuclear tests, had picked up something, a low, distant thump, faint but real, and the timing matched, sort of. So did the direction, kind of, but not quite enough. The signal came from a different part of the ocean, and after careful analysis, experts concluded it was probably nothing more than the groan of shifting plates deep beneath the Earth, a geological shrug mistaken for a scream. Meanwhile, time was running out. Flight 370 had carried 2 underwater locator beacons, small devices designed to survive a crash and emit a signal for 40 days. As the window closed in early April, something stirred. A faint rhythmic ping. Not constant, not conclusive, but close enough to raise hope. Search crews sent down an autonomous submersible. It scanned the ocean floor near the source of the signal, diving as deep as 3,000 meters. Week after week it mapped the seabed, tracing ridges and valleys, searching for anything unnatural. It found nothing. The pings fell silent, the batteries died, and the search, once again, drifted back into silence. For 16 months there was nothing. No answers, no wreckage, just silence. Then, on July 29, 2015, on a quiet beach far from the search zone, the Indian Ocean finally gave something back. It was early morning on Réunion Island, a small French territory east of Madagascar, when a cleanup crew spotted something in the sand, 2 meters long, encrusted with barnacles, and half buried among the seaweed, a piece of something once engineered to fly. It was a flaperon, a movable part of an aircraft wing. Aviation experts flew in. They checked the internal markings, codes, stamps, serial numbers. The evidence was clear. This flaperon had once belonged to a Boeing 77, and not just any Boeing 7070. It was from Malaysia Airlines Flight 370. The beach was more than 4,000 kilometers from where the plane was thought to have gone down, but oceanographers weren't surprised. Their models had long predicted that wreckage could drift that far. The current made sense. The timeline fit. It wasn't much, just a single salt-worn wing piece. But it was the first physical proof that the plane hadn't been hijacked to some secret airstrip. It hadn't vanished into thin air. It had crashed, somewhere, out there, in the endless blue. The flaperon changed everything. Search teams began combing the coastlines of southeastern Africa, Mozambique, Tanzania, Madagascar. They scoured beaches, mangrove inlets, rocky shores. Slowly, the ocean began offering up more clues. Over time, at least 31 more fragments were recovered, washed ashore or tangled in seaweed. Some were instantly recognizable: a broken section of the right wing's outboard flap, a curved piece of engine cowling, its Rolls-Royce logo barely visible, a crumpled portion of the vertical stabilizer, a twisted bit of cabin interior, once part of a headrest screen, and a shattered piece of the nose landing gear door, its metal edges curled and sheared by immense force. 18 of these fragments were labeled either likely, highly likely, or almost certain to have come from Flight 370. 3 were confirmed beyond doubt. The rest remained uncertain, mute pieces of plastic, metal, and carbon fiber. Most showed no sign of fire, no scorching, no explosion residue. But one item, never identified, bore 3 small burn marks, not enough to mean much, but not nothing either. Then came the satellites. After reviewing images from March 2014, analysts spotted clusters of small shapes drifting across the southern Indian Ocean. Some looked man-made, possibly debris, but the images were blurry, too blurry to make out serial numbers, too blurry to track. Planes flew over the coordinates, ships passed through. Nothing was ever found. One image, taken just hours after the final satellite ping, seemed to capture a contrail arcing across the sky, but later analysis said it wasn't a contrail at all, just the shadow of a long, narrow cloud. Still, the underwater search pressed on. Over the next 3 years, more than 120,000 square kilometers of seabed were mapped and scanned. When that ended in 2017, a private company, Ocean Infinity, picked up the search. They used autonomous submarines and high-resolution sonar. After another year of hunting, they too found nothing. The plane was still missing. As the wreckage remained hidden, so did the truth. Theories multiplied. Some pointed to 2 passengers with stolen passports, possible hijackers, but it turned out they were asylum seekers with no ties to terrorism. Others noticed a passenger listed as an aircraft systems engineer, someone who might have known how to take control of a Boeing 777. No theory could be ruled out, and none could be proven. The wreck was still out there, somewhere beneath thousands of meters of dark, silent water. Flight 370 wasn't just carrying passengers. Alongside the 239 people on board, the cargo hold held nearly 11 metric tons of freight. One item in particular stood out: a shipment of lithium-ion batteries. That detail raised early suspicions. In 2010, a UPS cargo flight caught fire mid-air because of lithium batteries. The blaze spread fast, filled the cockpit with smoke, and brought the plane down near Dubai. Some wondered, could something similar have happened here? Another possibility, an electrical fire. In 1998, Swiss Air Flight 111 crashed after a hidden fire spread above the cockpit, inside the insulation. It destroyed wiring, knocked out systems, and brought down the aircraft. Among the systems lost, the transponders and SATCOM. That case stuck in the minds of many investigators. Could Flight 370's silence, radar vanishing, and course change have been a reaction to something like that? Maybe the pilots were trying to turn back, head for an emergency landing. That would make sense. But the strange part is, no emergency call was made, no descent toward an airport. Instead, the plane flew on, turning west, crossing Malaysia, and then continuing out over open ocean for hours. Some believe the crew never got the chance, that something happened inside the cabin, something invisible, like decompression, but the crew didn't put them on in time. Everyone on board lost consciousness, and the plane flew on autopilot for more than 2 hours until it ran out of fuel and crashed. Could something like that have happened here? Pilots are trained for cabin pressure failures. Masks drop, altitude drops. But if the failure was silent, or if the crew was already incapacitated, it's possible no one responded. Some point to military radar suggesting strange altitude shifts, climbing far above normal, then plunging in seconds. But those numbers don't make sense. A Boeing 777 can't fly like that. Simulations couldn't match the movements. Most believe the readings were radar artifacts, ghosts in the data. Still, the timeline fits. If the cabin lost pressure and no one reacted, the plane could have flown straight for hours. But even if the crew was unconscious, someone was still changing course. The early data suggested something troubling. That first hard left turn, it was sharper than what the autopilot could do on its own, which meant someone had to be flying manually. After that, things get murkier. The plane's heading changed several times. Could have been the autopilot. Could have been hands on the controls. But if it was on autopilot, someone had to program it. Someone who knew exactly what they were doing. Then came the headlines. In June 2014, several media outlets reported that Captain Zahari Ahmad Shah, pilot of Flight 370, had become a suspect. When authorities searched his home, they found something unusual, a custom-built flight simulator. And inside it, according to the reports, was a simulated flight path into the southern Indian Ocean. At first, officials said nothing. The massive report issued by the Malaysian government in 2015 didn't even mention it. But in 2016, confidential documents were leaked. They showed that the simulator route was real and had been fully analysed by police just weeks after the disappearance. A short time later, Malaysian officials confirmed it. The data existed. The file contained 7 points, 2 near Kuala Lumpur, 2 in the Strait of Malacca, 1 in the Bay of Bengal, and 2 in the southern Indian Ocean. Suspicious? Maybe, but the data wasn't a full path. It was a scattered group of coordinates, possibly from different sessions, not necessarily a connected route. The police report concluded that nothing in the recovered files clearly showed intent or planning. Still, the pattern was enough to influence the search. Investigators considered the possibility of someone trying to maximize the plane's range by gliding it after the fuel ran out. Or, maybe, bringing it down gently before the tanks were empty. Both ideas were unlikely, but they shifted how and where the search was focused. If Zahari did steer the plane off course on purpose, his reasons remain locked away. He was 53, married, 3 kids, over 18,000 flight hours, no debts, no red flags in his spending, no mental health history, no sudden changes in mood or behavior. He'd grown up on Penang Island, and that's led to speculation that the plane's second turn, near Penang, was Zahari taking one final look at the place he called home. Some say it was political. Zahari had shown support for a prominent opposition figure, one who was sentenced to 5 years in prison just hours before the flight took off. Others suggest personal troubles, but that's been denied by family and wasn't reflected in the official findings. The final report noted one irregularity. During his last radio transmission, Zahari didn't repeat the assigned frequency. Normally, pilots confirm the handover with a readback. He'd done so earlier. Why not this time? Could have been nothing, could have meant something. There's no way to know. By all accounts, Zahari was warm, charismatic, and deeply passionate about flying. His social media pages were full of cockpit photos and videos he'd made to help others learn. Captain Zahari. Hi everyone, this is a YouTube video that I've made, Captain Zahari. While most of the spotlight landed on the captain, the man sitting next to him barely made a ripple. First Officer Farik Abdul Hamid was 27 years old, newly engaged, quiet, clean record, just under 3,000 hours of flight time, and only 39 of them in a Boeing 77. He was still learning the ropes, but there was no history of trouble, no debt, no illness, no signs of stress, no tension between him and the captain. By all accounts, they got along fine. Still, when people talk about the theory of a pilot hijacking, there's always the same question: wouldn't the other pilot have stopped it? Well, not necessarily. Just a month before Flight 370 vanished, in February 2014, another flight was quietly hijacked, this time by a co-pilot. Ethiopian Airlines Flight 702. The captain stepped out to use the restroom. The co-pilot locked the cockpit door, diverted the flight to Switzerland, landed, asked for asylum. No struggle, no violence, just a locked door. If someone on Flight 370 wanted to do something similar, they wouldn't need a dramatic takeover, just a moment of privacy and a plan. As for Farik, there's only one piece of evidence that's ever really stood out, and it didn't come from the plane, it came from the ground. When those leaked documents came out, the same ones about the flight simulator, they confirmed another long circulating rumour. At some point near the island of Penang, right around the time the aircraft took its sharpest turn, one of Farik's devices briefly connected to a cell phone tower. It was an iPhone 5S, his personal phone. The connection was brief, just a simple ping, like a phone checking for signal. Not a call, not a message, just a digital pulse. Still, it raised questions. Why was his phone on? Was he trying to connect? Or was it just an automatic signal from a forgotten device? The ping was real, but it never made it into the official reports. No explanation, just silence. So what can we really say? On one side, the captain's simulated route looks troubling. On the other, nothing solid ties either man to a crime. The two pilots, despite all the attention, left no obvious red flags. Yet the most likely explanation still seems to involve someone on the inside. Maybe a hijacking, maybe something else. Until the wreckage is found, it's all theories and two empty seats in the cockpit. In 2018, after years of searching, investigating and theorizing, the Malaysian government released its final report on Flight 370. And while it runs hundreds of pages deep, the core of it can be summed up in one uncomfortable truth. They still don't know what happened. There were no signs of mechanical failure. The systems didn't just shut down on their own. Investigators believe the loss of communication and the course changes were done by hand. One example? The satellite link. It didn't just flicker out. They think someone cut the power long enough to kill the connection, then turned it back on. The system rebooted like it was starting from scratch. Same with the turns, the angles, the timing, they weren't random. Someone somewhere told the plane where to go. But here's the catch, the report doesn't say it was a hijacking. In fact, it stops just short of saying anything definitive. Every conclusion comes with a quiet disclaimer. Every theory ends with a question mark. Without the wreckage, they can't prove what happened. And without answers, they can't point a finger. The only thing both the Malaysian and Australian governments do agree on is this. The plane went down in the southern Indian Ocean. Somewhere out there, past the search grids, beyond the sonar scans, MH370 rests in silence. How it got there? Still a mystery. Even now, after millions of dollars, dozens of ships and years of analysis, the flight remains one of the greatest disappearances in aviation history. A vanishing act with no confirmed motive, no confirmed culprit, and most haunting of all, no ending. In the years since Flight 370 vanished, a chorus of voices, authors, pilots, analysts, armchair detectives have all taken turns trying to solve the puzzle. What they've come up with ranges from mildly plausible to absolutely cinematic. Some are convinced there was no crash at all, that the plane got too close to a secretive US naval base in the Indian Ocean and was shot down to protect something. The satellite data, they say, fabricated. A cover-up on a scale so vast it would make the moon landing hoax look like a prank. Others believe the aircraft didn't go south, it went north, maybe towards Central Asia. Kazakhstan is a popular destination in these theories. The radar missed it, the satellites were fooled, and the wreckage that washed up in Africa, carefully planted, as part of, you guessed it, another cover-up. Another idea says the plane was hijacked, just not from the inside. Instead, someone on the ground took control remotely. Boeing has dabbled with tech like that, but no commercial plane, including this one, is believed to have had that capability. And not every theory involves black ops and Bond villains. Some are just about bad assumptions. The official search worked from the idea that the plane flew more or less straight and steady once it turned south. But what if it didn't? In 2018, a French team proposed something different. What if Flight 370 tried to land on Christmas Island and failed? If so, the wreckage would be far north of where anyone has looked. That patch of ocean was checked, but only on the surface. The deep search never reached that far. It's one of many places the plane might still be, just out of sight, just out of reach. For now, the search is paused, not ended. There are whispers, plans being drafted, ships waiting for the call. Because somewhere out there, the answers are still waiting. Flight 370 was one of the biggest aviation mysteries in modern history. But it's not the only case where someone, or something, vanished without a trace. Some disappearances are smaller, quieter, but somehow even more disturbing. Laureen Ann Rahn was born on April 3, 1966, in the city of Manchester, New Hampshire. What we know about her childhood is limited, but we do know this. Her parents split up before she could form many memories. She was still an infant when her father left the picture, and contact with him would remain minimal as she grew up. By the time she was 4, Laureen and her mother Judith had left New Hampshire behind. They moved south, chasing a new beginning in the humid sprawl of Miami, Florida. But the fresh start didn't last. Life there proved harder than expected. and after a few years of trying to make it work, they returned to Manchester in 1976. By 1980, Lorraine and her mother were living on the third floor of a modest apartment building. Her school, Parkside Junior High, was just a short walk away, and while the family had never quite found stability, there were parts of Lorraine that never wavered. She dreamed big, she danced often, she wanted to be someone. She'd talk about it with her friends, how one day she'd pack her things, head to Hollywood, and become a star. She didn't just want to perform, she needed to. The spotlight, the stage, the applause, they felt more like a calling than a fantasy. She was also close with her mum. The two of them shared a bond that weathered the ups and downs of single-parent life. But like a lot of teenagers, there were things Judith didn't know, things Lorraine didn't share. By junior high, Lorraine had started drinking. She'd begun smoking too. Small secrets, quiet habits, the kind of things that seem normal until they aren't. By the spring of 1980, Lorraine's mother had started dating a man who played professional tennis. Judith would often travel with him to his out-of-town matches, and most of the time Lorraine came along. But this time was different. It was the weekend of April 26th, and school was out for spring break. Lorraine wanted to stay behind. She asked, pleaded even, to be allowed to stay home alone in the apartment. Judith wasn't sure at first. Lorraine was still only 13, just weeks away from her 14th birthday. But eventually she gave in. It was only one night, and she promised to be back early the next morning. Once her mother left, Lorraine had the apartment to herself. She spent the day drifting between the usual teenage rituals, tidying up, flipping through TV channels, chatting on the phone. A few relatives even stopped by to check in, just in case. That afternoon, she headed out to a liquor store a few blocks away. Lorraine didn't work there, not officially, but one of her friends would later say she sometimes helped out in exchange for drinks. When she returned home, she had a six-pack of beer and a bottle of wine in her hands. A little later, she picked up the phone again, this time to call two friends, a guy and a girl. She asked if they wanted to hang out, have a few drinks, and listen to music. They were hesitant at first, but once Lorraine mentioned her mum was out of town, they changed their minds. They said they'd be right over. The three of them spent the evening holed up inside the apartment, talking, drinking, and playing records. It was just another teenage night in a quiet New England town. Nothing wild, nothing strange. At least, not yet. Sometime around 12:30 a.m., the quiet apartment suddenly wasn't so quiet. Voices echoed through the hallway outside. Loud ones. Close. Inside, the three teenagers froze. They didn't know who it was, but they thought they did. For a moment, they panicked. Lorraine's mother wasn't supposed to be back until morning. But what if she'd come home early? Having people over was one thing, but having a boy over, late at night, with alcohol on the table, that was a whole different story. What happened next isn't completely clear. Maybe Lorraine told the boy to leave. Maybe he panicked on his own and made a run for it. Either way, he slipped out the back door, and as it closed behind him, he swore he heard it lock. This is where things started to feel strange. It wasn't Judith and her boyfriend in the hallway after all, just someone passing by. But by the time Lorianne realized that, her male friend was already gone. Whether he panicked and ran, or she told him to go, no one knows. Either way, the boy said later that he clearly heard the door lock behind him. About 45 minutes later, Judith and her boyfriend pulled into the driveway. It was almost 2 in the morning. They were tired, ready for bed, and expected to find Lauren asleep, or maybe pretending to be. But the second they walked inside, something didn't sit right. The entire hallway was dark, not dim, not shadowy. Pitch black from the ground floor all the way up to the third. They thought the power might be out. But when Judith's boyfriend reached up to check the nearest light fixture, he found the bulb had been unscrewed. Not broken, just loose. A few steps later, same thing. Then another. All of the hallway bulbs had been twisted out of their sockets. It was weird, but not enough to raise full alarm. At first, they just figured it was a prank. Maybe some neighbor kids messing around. Or maybe Lorianne and her friends thought it would be funny. But once they got to the apartment door, the feeling changed again. The door was unlocked. Judith's boyfriend stepped inside first. He walked straight to the back of the apartment to check the windows and the back exit. Meanwhile, Judith made her way toward Lorraine's room. Her plan was simple. Make sure Lorraine was safe, maybe scold her a little, and then get some sleep. From the bedroom doorway, she could see someone lying in the bed. A dark figure curled under the blanket. Then her boyfriend called out to her from the kitchen. The back door was open. Judith's heart began to sink. Now it wasn't just light bulbs and an unlocked door. Now there were two doors, front and back, left wide open in the middle of the night. And someone had been lying in her daughter's bed just moments earlier. She stepped closer, finally entering the room, and that's when she noticed something else. The smell. Faint but unmistakable. Alcohol. The girl in Lauren's bed wasn't Lauren. It was her friend. Half asleep, a little groggy, the girl tried to sit up. Judith didn't raise her voice. She just kept asking where Lauren was, and why the doors were open. The girl was disoriented at first, but then said that Lorien had gone to the couch. Maybe 30 minutes earlier. She had taken a pillow and a blanket and said she was going to sleep in the living room instead. Judith went to check, but the couch was empty. The blanket and pillow were there, tossed loosely along the cushions. Lorien's shoes were on the floor nearby. Her purse was sitting right next to them, but Lorien herself was gone, and it didn't look like she had gone far or planned to. Her friend said she'd still been wearing jeans, a blue plaid shirt, and a light V-neck sweater, but those clothes were now missing. There were no signs of a break-in. Nothing had been taken. Nothing was broken. No noise. No struggle. Just the faint smell of alcohol in the air. 2 unscrewed light bulbs in the hallway, and 1 open back door leading into the quiet, empty dark. And just like that, Lorien was gone. Judith was now in full panic mode. The girl in the bed was awake but barely coherent. Judith kept asking her, over and over, what happened. Who else was there? Where did Lorien go? But the girl just looked dazed. She said she remembered hanging out, drinking, listening to music. She remembered Lorien being there, and remembered the boy who stopped by. But beyond that, she said she didn't remember much else. She had been too drunk, too tired. Everything was a blur. Judith's boyfriend stepped in to try and steady the situation. He told her to take a breath, think clearly, start making calls. So that's exactly what she did. She picked up the phone and started dialing anyone she could think of. Friends, classmates, neighbors, even distant relatives. Some of them answered groggily, others didn't pick up at all. But none of them had seen or heard from Lorien. Still holding on to hope, Judith and her boyfriend got back in the car. They drove around the neighborhood, slowly, peering into alleyways and storefronts, checking sidewalks and bus stops. Maybe Lorien had stepped out to clear her head. Maybe she'd gotten turned around. Maybe she'd had too much to drink and just laid down somewhere nearby. But block after block turned up nothing. By 4 in the morning, Judith had had enough. She spotted a patrol car and flagged it down in the street. Her voice was trembling. Her daughter was gone, she said. Just vanished. The officer took her seriously. Within the hour, the local police were on the case. An official missing person report was filed, and officers began canvassing the area. They knocked on doors, questioned neighbors, and brought both of Lorien's friends in for questioning. The boy who had left out the back said he hadn't seen or heard anything strange. He just thought her mum had come home early. The girl who'd stayed behind said the same. Aside from drinking, music, and the usual teenage chatter, there was nothing weird, at least. Nothing she could remember. By morning, investigators had already begun interviewing everyone close to Lorien. Friends, teachers, classmates, her boss at the liquor store. Anyone who might know something. But no one had any answers. There were no known enemies, no obvious threats, no recent arguments or breakups or falling outs. The only recurring theme was that Lorien sometimes talked about wanting to leave, start over, run away and become famous. But even that was mostly talk. No one had ever taken it seriously. She hadn't packed a bag, hadn't said goodbye, hadn't taken her purse or her shoes. Officers expanded the search. They checked hospitals and local jails just in case. They contacted bus depots, cab companies, even gas stations. Posters were printed. Phone calls were made, but no one had seen her. No one remembered her coming through. And just like that, the trail went cold. Just when it felt like everything had come to a dead stop, like they'd hit a wall with nowhere else to look, a glimmer of something unexpected surfaced. A bus company employee came forward with a strange bit of information. He said that on the day Lorien disappeared, he remembered selling a ticket to a girl who looked a lot like her. She was alone, quiet, and seemed like she was in a hurry. He couldn't say for sure, but something about the way she looked stuck with him. And then came something even more intriguing. One of the company's drivers claimed he remembered her too. He said she boarded his bus and rode it all the way to Boston, about 50 miles south. He swore that she got off at the terminal there, but beyond that he had no idea where she went. She didn't speak to anyone. She didn't seem lost or scared. She just vanished into the crowd, like so many others before her. This, of course, changed everything. Or at least it seemed like it might. If it really had been Lauren on that bus, then maybe she hadn't been taken. Maybe she'd left on her own. Maybe she was in Boston now, scared, confused, but alive. Investigators jumped on it. They asked the driver more questions, pressed the ticket clerk for more details, and brought them both in to look at photographs. At first it all seemed promising, but then slowly the cracks started to show. A few weeks later, when the bus driver was shown a more up-to-date picture of Lauren, his confidence started to falter. He admitted that maybe he'd been mistaken. Maybe the girl he'd seen was someone else entirely, just another teenage girl who happened to look a little like her. It was enough to knock the wind out of everyone's sails. Still, without any evidence of foul play, no blood, no signs of struggle, no forced entry, the official line remained the same: she must have run away. Officers told Judith that most runaways return home after a week or two, once the harsh reality of life on the streets sets in. They said it kindly, like it was meant to be comforting, but to Judith it felt like a dismissal, because deep down she didn't believe it, not for a second. Lauren hadn't taken her purse, she hadn't taken her new shoes, she hadn't packed any of her favorite clothes, or even left a note. She didn't have any money. And most importantly, she hadn't said a word, not even a goodbye. Judith knew her daughter. They were close, maybe not perfect, but close enough that something like this just didn't make sense. Even if Lauren had wanted to run, even if she'd really meant it this time, she would have called, she would have written. She would have let her mum know that she was safe, but she didn't, and that silence said more than anything else ever could. As time dragged on, Judith started to accept the possibility she might never see her daughter again. But then 5 months after Lauren disappeared, on October 1st, 1980, something strange happened. She got the phone bill, and on it were charges for 3 long-distance calls, all from hotels, 2 in Santa Monica, 1 in Santa Ana, California. Now Judith didn't know anyone in California. She had no family there, no friends, no business, nothing. So she came to the only conclusion that made sense. Lauren had to be the one who made those calls. She started digging, and what she found made her stomach twist. One of the calls from Santa Ana had been placed to a sexual assistance hotline, one aimed at helping exploited and abused teenagers, runaways, kids who had gotten in over their heads. Judith gave this information to the police right away, and not long after a detective called the man who ran the hotline. He was a doctor, professional, well known in his field. But when asked about the call, the doctor said he had no idea what they were talking about. No records, no memory, no clue, and just like that, the lead hit a wall. Then things got even stranger. Not long after the investigation stalled, Judith began receiving phone calls in the middle of the night, always around the same time, about 3:45 in the morning, and they kept coming, not every night, but regularly, sometimes for weeks in a row, then nothing for a while, then again. This went on for years, but the oddest part, the caller never said a word, just silence on the other end, not static, not breathing, just nothing. And Judith, sitting there in the dark with the phone pressed to her ear, always felt the same thing, that it was Lauren, that somehow, somewhere, her daughter was out there, alive, scared maybe, but reaching out the only way she could. She noticed the calls spiked around the holidays, Christmas, her birthday, Mother's Day. It only deepened the suspicion. And then came something else. Lauren's aunt, Judith's sister, claimed she too received calls from a young woman. Not silent ones, though. The girl on the line would ask to speak to her son Michael, but she didn't call him Michael. She called him Mike, the same way Lauren always had when they were younger. The voice, the tone, everything sounded just like her. And even though the girl never said her name, Lauren's aunt was convinced it had to be her, but no trace ever surfaced. No follow-up. And after a few years, Judith finally gave in and changed her phone number. The calls stopped completely after that. And just like that, the silence returned. A couple years passed, and in 1985, an investigator with an organization called Wings for Children made contact with the same doctor tied to that hotline Judith had been charged for. This time, he gave up a little more, but not much. He claimed that his home was occasionally visited by runaways and vulnerable teens, and he even suggested, offhandedly, that one of them might have been from New Hampshire. It wasn't clear why his story changed or why he was so evasive, but that shift in tone was enough to raise a few alarms. The following year, the same investigator traveled to Santa Ana and Santa Monica to follow the paper trail. She started checking out motels, especially ones that might have been tied to the phone bill. That's when she heard whispers about a man known only as Dr. Z, someone allegedly involved in underground video work with minors. One of the motels, she was told, had been used as a filming location, but no proof ever surfaced. No full name, no arrest, nothing. And then, back in New Hampshire, something else. A boy who'd once been close to Lorraine growing up said he got a call from a girl who identified herself as Laurie. He wasn't home when the call came in, but his mother passed along the message. He was convinced it was her, but that was it. The sightings came and went, always just vague enough to slip away. And the case? Lorraine vanished in a narrow window, between her friend falling asleep and her mother coming home. She didn't take money, didn't take clothes, just disappeared. The light bulbs in the hallway had been twisted loose, the doors left open, and after that came the calls, the bills, the silence. Lorraine vanished in a narrow window, between her friend falling asleep and her mother coming home. She didn't take money, didn't take clothes, just disappeared. The light bulbs in the hallway had been twisted loose, the doors left open, and after that came the calls, the bills, the silence. The guard went straight to the control room and pulled up the surveillance footage. What he found only deepened the mystery. The night before, at just before 9 p.m, a woman, later identified as 37-year-old Lou, stepped into the elevator with her 4-year-old daughter in her arms. She looked anxious, rushed. She then removed her coat, her daughter's coat, and both of their shoes, placing them neatly on the floor. When the elevator reached the 11th floor, she picked the child back up and walked out. A hallway camera caught her turning into the stairwell. And then, nothing. No more footage. No exit. No return. No trace. Police searched the building from top to bottom. Every hallway, stairwell, and maintenance shaft, there were no signs of them anywhere. The building only had one monitored exit, and Liu's motorcycle was still parked outside, untouched. Officers interviewed residents, checked every unit on the 11th floor, and questioned nearby businesses. But no one saw or heard a thing. And most puzzling of all, no one could figure out why Leo had gone to the building in the first place. Liu didn't seem like someone who would just vanish. She was a mother of 4, a homemaker, the kind of woman who built her world around her children. But when police started looking into her life, a different story started to emerge. She had grown up in a quiet rural village, where tradition mattered more than happiness. She was beautiful and well-liked, but none of that changed the fact that her mother had already arranged her marriage. The man she married had money, land, and a decent reputation, but no warmth, no patience, no restraint. Behind closed doors, Liu's marriage was filled with shouting and fear. Her husband drank heavily, and when he did, he turned cruel. After years of enduring it, Liu made a rare move for women in her town. She left, and the village didn't take kindly to it. Still, she pushed on. She raised her children alone until her husband came crawling back full of apologies. He swore he'd changed. She believed him. They remarried, had another child. But the cycle repeated itself. The drinking returned. So did the absences, and the anger. By 2008, she was alone again in all but name, raising 4 children with no help, drowning in debt, and visibly unraveling. People close to her said she was off in the days before she vanished. She wasn't just stressed, she was distant, unsteady. Something was slipping. Then, after a particularly loud argument with her husband, she told her family she was going to stay with a friend. She didn't say who. She didn't bring anything with her. No bag, no ID, no phone, just her youngest daughter. And then she left. What happened next is a blank. There were no exits, no signs, no answers, only theories. Some said she jumped from the roof, but there was no way up that wasn't locked down. Others believed she left to start a new life, but why bring her daughter? Why vanish barefoot in the middle of winter? Some whispered about a secret lover, that she had someone waiting in the building. But no one in the building knew her. No one had seen her before. Not the guard, not a single resident. Then came the worst theory, the one that made people lower their voices, that something happened to her inside that stairwell. Something sudden, silent, and final. By 2013, the disappearance had settled into something between a ghost story and an urban legend. People still whispered about it in coffee shops and elevators, especially on cold nights. The finance building was still standing, mostly unchanged, now home to new tenants, most unaware of what had happened there 5 years earlier. That year, local police gave the case another shot, a full reinvestigation, new people, better tech, fresh eyes. Maybe something had been missed the first time. Maybe a blind spot in the cameras, a clue buried in the wiring. The building was swept again, top to bottom. Officers checked blueprints, scanned for blind spots, and revisited the 11th floor, dusty stairwells and vacant units. They opened closets, peered into ceiling panels, and crawled through service shafts, but nothing. They talked to newer residents too, in case someone had heard a rumor or seen something odd. But the replies were always the same. People knew the story. They had theories, but no answers. In the end, the second search didn't just come up short, it proved how thoroughly the pair had vanished. No new leads, no gaps in the footage, no trace of anyone else involved. So the case returned to limbo, marked missing, still full of holes. Today, nearly 20 years later, the building remains. The elevator still runs, the cameras still hum, but Liu and her daughter are gone. No sightings, no notes, no goodbyes. All that's left is a strange piece of footage. A barefoot mother, a silent child, 2 coats, 2 shoes, and an elevator ride that never ends.